The concourse at Atlanta International Airport pulsed with the rhythm of morning travel. Rolling suitcases rattled against tile floors, muffled boarding calls echoed overhead, and the smell of strong coffee lingered in the air. In the crowd of executives, tourists, and families rushing toward gates, David Carter stood out, not because of his height or his distinguished grey-streaked hair, but because of the quiet confidence in his stride. Dressed in a navy suit tailored to perfection, his polished shoes catching the fluorescent light, and a slim leather briefcase in his hand, embossed with the initials DC, he looked like any successful businessman catching an early flight. Few, if any, passengers recognized that David was in fact a sitting dual United States Senator, a man entrusted with shaping policies that governed the very airport security checkpoint he was about to face. Yet anonymity often proved to be double-edged. While it shielded him from the gaze of constituents, it also left him vulnerable to the unconscious biases of those who judged not by credentials, but by skin. As he approached the TSA line, David removed his laptop and shoes like everyone else, placing them neatly into the grey plastic bin. His movements were calm, precise, and polite, the habits of someone who had passed through more airports than he could count. But the two officers stationed nearby whispered among themselves, eyes narrowing. "That guy looks edgy," one muttered. "Let's run him through secondary." David did not hear them, but he felt the weight of their stare as he stepped through the detector. The alarm beeped shrilly. He frowned. He carried no belt, no coins, no watch. "That's odd. Want me to try again?" he asked calmly. The officer's expression hardened. "Step aside, sir. Secondary screening." In that moment, the murmur of the line shifted. Travelers craned their necks, curiosity flickering into suspicion, and a small child tugged at his father's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, why are they stopping that man?" The father's quiet reply, "Sometimes people aren't what they look like," stabbed deeper than the metal detector's beep. The secondary inspection unfolded with a harshness that went beyond procedure. David was guided into a glass booth, transparent on all sides, like a specimen displayed for public judgment. The officer patted him down with unnecessary force, while another officer pulled open his briefcase and rifled through the carefully organized contents. Papers spilled onto the floor, draft legislation stamped with bold headers like Committee on Federal Security Oversight. These were sensitive documents, the product of weeks of bipartisan work, now treated like disposable flyers. David inhaled slowly, steadying his voice even as humiliation prickled under his skin. "Those are federal documents," he said firmly. "Please handle them with care." The taller officer smirked, lifting a page carelessly. "Federal, huh? Everyone's got a story." He waved the paper slightly, eyes flicking over the official seal, but dismissed it with a scoff. "Anyone could print this. Doesn't mean anything." Around them, whispers thickened. "He must have done something," one traveler muttered. "Yeah, you don't get pulled aside for nothing," another replied. Phones were raised now, subtle glints of glass capturing the moment, ready to broadcast it beyond the terminal. The second officer leaned closer, his voice low but sharp. "You nervous, sir? You sweating? What are you hiding?" That was the breaking point. David straightened, his gaze steady, his voice cutting through the murmur with a resonance born from years commanding the Senate floor. "What I am hiding is nothing. What you have done is drag an innocent man into the spotlight, humiliate him in front of strangers, and trample on his dignity. And for what? Because my skin doesn't fit the picture you expected?" Gasps spread through the crowd. Some passengers nodded, others recorded more eagerly. The officers stiffened, hands twitching toward their belts as David reached slowly into his jacket. "Relax," he said evenly, voice calm as stone. "I'm not reaching for a weapon. I'm reaching for the truth." He drew out a black leather wallet and flipped it open with deliberate precision. Under the harsh fluorescent light, a gold emblem gleamed. United States Senate. His official credentials, complete with his photograph and embossed seal, stared back at the men who had just accused him. Silence fell over the checkpoint like a heavy curtain. The shift was immediate and seismic. The officers' faces drained of color, their authority crumbling into panic. "Senator, we didn't know. This is just routine." One stammered. David's voice sliced through the excuse. "Routine? I know routine. I helped write the policies that define routine. What you just did was not procedure. It was profiling." The smaller officer hurried to snap his briefcase shut and thrust it toward him, suddenly deferential. "Sir, please, you're free to go." No harm meant. David took it firmly, his voice edged with steel. "No harm meant? You mocked my work, scattered my documents, treated me like a criminal. The harm is already done, but it will not be ignored." A ripple of applause rose from the crowd. One woman near the front shouted, "That's right, Senator." Phones recorded as David lifted his badge higher, turning toward the gathering of stunned passengers. "Let this be clear. Dignity is not decided by appearance. Respect is not granted by assumption. And authority is not a license to abuse." His words echoed against the sterile walls, caught by a dozen cameras that would carry them far beyond this terminal. He closed his badge wallet with a decisive snap, gathered his papers, and strode forward, his wife Eleanor falling into step beside him, her expression equal parts relief and pride. The officers remained frozen in place, chastened by the crowd's disapproval. And as David disappeared down the concourse, passengers whispered not with suspicion, but with admiration. The video, already uploading from half a dozen phones, would go viral within hours. For now, though, what mattered was the simple truth he had proven in that glass booth. That even the most powerful man in the room could be judged by prejudice, but only if he allowed silence to win. David Carter had chosen not silence, but revelation. And the consequences for those officers, and for the system they represented, were only beginning. The flight back to Washington should have been a reprieve, a moment for Senator David Carter to retreat into silence and gather his thoughts, but the hum of the jet engines only underscored the restless rhythm of his mind. He sat by the window, his reflection fractured across the glass, while Eleanor kept her hand on his arm, wordless but steady. Just hours earlier, he had been paraded through an airport security checkpoint like a criminal, his credentials ignored until the very moment he revealed his Senate badge. Now, as the plane soared above the clouds, his phone buzzed with notifications piling faster than he could read. The video had spread like wildfire. A college student at the Atlanta terminal had filmed the entire exchange, from the mocking words, "Anyone could print that," to the dramatic reveal of his badge and the audible gasp of the crowd. The caption on Twitter read, "They profiled a black man at TSA. Turns out he's a U.S. Senator. Watch his response. Justice at the gate." By the time the wheels of his flight touched down in D.C., the clip had been viewed more than 2 million times. Reporters were already camped outside his townhouse, while headlines blazed across television screens. Senator confronts TSA in viral showdown. Elena scrolled through her phone and whispered, "David, they're calling you brave. People are writing about their own experiences, saying your story is theirs." He shook his head. "It can't just be about me. If this fades into a personal scandal, we lose the truth. This has to be about the system." His voice was calm, but beneath it, Elena heard the thrum of something heavier, an awareness that what had begun as humiliation in a glass booth was now spiraling into a national reckoning. The following morning, the fallout detonated. Every network replaced scheduled programming with roundtables dissecting the clip. One host leaned forward, eyes wide with indignation. "If this can happen to a United States Senator, what does that mean for ordinary Americans?" Another countered, "Airport security is high pressure. Mistakes happen. This isn't about race, it's about safety." Yet scrolling beneath their debate, the statistics told a different story. Government data showed black travelers flagged for secondary screening nearly twice as often as white travelers. Civil rights advocates seized the moment, circulating infographics that exposed systemic disparities. Ordinary citizens flooded social media with their own accounts. A mother describing her teenage son missing a basketball tournament after being held in security. A veteran recounting the humiliation of repeated pat-downs despite his uniform. Students lamenting missed flights due to random checks. Hashtags exploded. Justice at the gate. Carter for change. Flying while black. Dominating trending charts across platforms. Protesters appeared outside airports in Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, and New York, holding handmade signs. Stop profiling at airports. Equal. Dignity for all travelers. Safety without bias. Their chants of justice, justice, no more bias reverberated against terminal walls, echoing through departure halls where travelers usually whispered hurried goodbyes. Television anchors labeled it the Carter effect. One panelist declared, "This isn't just a clip, it's a mirror held up to America." David sat in his living room watching, exhaustion in his eyes, but resolve in his voice. His phone vibrated with a text from Senator Ramirez. "You've lit the match, brother. Be ready for the firestorm." Elena placed a steaming cup of coffee before him. "This is bigger than us now, isn't it?" He nodded. It always was. They just couldn't see it until now. 2 days later, the storm became impossible to escape. Reporters swarmed outside his townhouse, their microphones thrust forward as soon as he stepped onto the sidewalk. "Senator, do you plan to file charges?" One shouted. "Do you believe TSA engages in systemic profiling?" asked another. "What do you say to ordinary black travelers who suffer this without a badge?" David raised a hand, his voice carrying with the calm cadence of practiced authority. "This is bigger than me. What happened at that airport happens every day to citizens who don't have a platform, who don't have proof of their worth. This is about dignity, fairness, and accountability. If our security systems humiliate the very people they're meant to protect, then we have failed at democracy's most basic promise." His words aired live across networks and were clipped into shareable moments within minutes. A petition calling for independent oversight of TSA gathered 500,000 signatures in 48 hours. Critics fought back, accusing him of politicizing a routine matter. But each attempt to dismiss the issue was countered with data, testimony, and the growing roar of public outrage. That evening, David returned to Hartsfield-Jackson, this time intentionally. Hundreds of protesters filled the plaza, their signs rising against the skyline, their chants echoing like a drumbeat. Climbing onto a makeshift platform, he lifted a megaphone. "This movement isn't about one senator," he declared. "It's about every traveler who's ever been told they don't belong, every citizen who's been treated like a suspect instead of a neighbor. We are not here to weaken security. We are here to strengthen justice. True safety comes from trust, and trust cannot survive injustice." The crowd roared back, chants swelling until the night air vibrated with unity. A young woman near the front, tears streaking her cheeks, shouted, "Senator, because of you, I finally feel seen." David's throat tightened, but his voice remained steady. No one should need a badge to be seen. From this moment forward, we fight to make dignity the default, not the exception. Cameras captured the scene, broadcasting it across the nation. In living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces, Americans watched a movement solidify. The fallout was no longer just about one man's humiliation at a checkpoint. It was about a nation deciding whether equality stopped at the gates of its airports. The corridors of Capitol Hill were buzzing before dawn, a low hum of anticipation that only grew as the morning sun lit the marble steps of the Senate office building. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, reporters rehearsing live intros while camera crews adjusted tripods. Inside, the chamber designated for the Homeland Security Committee hearing filled with people far beyond its usual capacity. Journalists pressed shoulder to shoulder along the back wall. Civil rights advocates clustered in the gallery, and ordinary citizens who had camped out overnight sat clutching hand-painted signs folded discreetly across their laps. The double doors swung open, and a hush swept through the room as Senator David Carter entered. He walked with deliberate composure, his navy suit impeccable, his briefcase in hand, Elena following just a step behind before slipping into the gallery. The sight of him triggered a burst of camera flashes, but David's gaze remained forward, steady. At the witness table opposite sat senior TSA officials, their postures stiff, their faces betraying a cocktail of anxiety and defiance. Some shuffled papers with trembling fingers, others stared at the polished wood of the table, rather than risk meeting his eyes. The committee chair, a stern woman with decades of service etched into her voice, raised the gavel and struck it down. This hearing will come to order. We are here to investigate allegations of misconduct and racial profiling within the Transportation Security Administration in light of the incident involving our colleague, Senator David Carter. Every head turned toward him. The chair gestured. "Senator, you may deliver your opening statement." David leaned forward, adjusting the microphone. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the soft hum of recording equipment. Then his voice filled the chamber, calm yet edged with unmistakable steel. "Thank you, Madam Chair. What happened to me in Atlanta was humiliating, yes, but I am not here because I was humiliated. I am here because what happened to me happens to countless others. Travelers who do not have a Senate badge to shield them, who cannot flash credentials to suddenly transform suspicion into respect. This is not about one man's inconvenience. This is about systemic injustice." The words landed like hammer blows. Murmurs rippled across the gallery, pens scribbled furiously, and cameras zoomed tighter. David recounted the incident with careful precision, the officer's mocking tone as confidential committee documents spilled to the floor, the derisive comment. Anyone could print this. That sliced deeper than the pat-down itself, the way the crowd's perception shifted only after he revealed his badge. "Dignity should not depend on rank or title," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Authority without accountability is nothing more than sanctioned prejudice. If the measure of respect is determined by appearance rather than principle, then our democracy is already compromised." The gallery erupted in applause before the chair's gavel restored order. One TSA administrator, face taut, leaned into his microphone. "With respect, Senator, our officers operate under immense pressure. Secondary screenings are routine and vital to national security." David's reply came swift, slicing through the excuse. "Routine? Routine does not involve mockery. Routine does not mean assuming guilt based on skin color. And if so-called routine procedures disproportionately target one demographic, then they cease to be routine. They become discriminatory by design." The exchange crackled with electricity. Reporters scribbled furiously. The gallery whispered with urgency. The hearing stretched for hours, testimony layering fact upon fact until the weight of evidence became undeniable. Civil rights attorneys presented studies showing black travelers flagged for extra searches at nearly double the rate of white travelers. A young lawyer recounted clients missing weddings, funerals, and job interviews because of unjust detentions. Scholars displayed graphs illustrating patterns across decades, while public defenders told stories of humiliation endured by ordinary citizens who lacked a platform to speak. David listened intently, interjecting when necessary. At one point, a fellow senator posed the question everyone in the chamber felt hanging in the air. "Senator Carter, do you believe your treatment was an isolated mistake, or evidence of something systemic?" David leaned forward, his voice low but resonant. "If this were rare, we might call it a mistake, but the data proves otherwise. This is not about a few bad actors. This is about a culture, an institution, that allows suspicion to replace fairness, prejudice to masquerade as policy. The mistake is not in one officer's decision. The mistake is in our silence, our failure to hold the system accountable. The gallery erupted again, applause mingling with shouts of, "Yes," and "Tell the truth." Before the gavel fell once more, TSA officials sat motionless, their earlier defenses withering under the spotlight. When the final witness stepped down, the committee chair spoke firmly. This body will pursue a full investigation into TSA practices, and disciplinary measures will be recommended. We will not allow the rights of citizens to be trampled under the guise of security. As the cameras flashed and journalists surged forward, David stood. His presence filled the room, not just as a senator defending his dignity, but as a man carrying the voices of millions who had endured the same silent indignities. For those watching live across the country, the hearing was more than a formality. It was vindication, proof that the humiliation at the gate was not just personal, but political, not just anecdote, but evidence. And for David Carter, it was the spark that could turn outrage into reform, silence into a movement, humiliation into history. The morning after the hearing, the country awoke not to ordinary news cycles, but to an avalanche. Every major network replayed clips of Senator David Carter's testimony on loop. His calm retelling of humiliation at the Atlanta checkpoint, his thunderous declaration. Authority without accountability is merely sanctioned prejudice. And his pointed exchange with TSA officials whose excuses crumbled under scrutiny. Cable news producers spliced his words beside charts showing disparities in screening, creating a visual narrative too stark to ignore. Headlines screamed from coast to coast. Senator exposes profiling in TSA. Justice at the gate becomes national reckoning. From humiliation to reform. Editorial boards weighed in with urgency. Even conservative outlets that usually shied away from civil rights debates conceded that the footage of Carter being mocked before flashing his badge was deeply troubling. Meanwhile, late-night comedians opened monologues with sharp satire, one quipping, "You know TSA messed up when the guy you pulled aside is the one who approves your budget." The chamber's oak-paneled gravitas had spilled onto smartphones, onto coffee shop screens, into classrooms. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion about dignity at airports. Yet the storm did not remain confined to talk shows. Across the country, ordinary citizens began turning the conversation into action. In Chicago, travelers staged a sit-in at O'Hare's security line, holding signs that read, "Our rights don't stop at the gate." At LAX, activists passed out pamphlets citing statistics of racial disparities. In Atlanta, the very sight of Carter's humiliation, hundreds gathered with candles, chanting softly into the night, "Justice at the gate, justice for all." The atmosphere was less angry than resolute, a collective vow that silence was no longer an option. On social media, the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack transformed into a digital archive of lived experience. Thousands of posts surfaced, mothers describing toddlers forced into invasive pat-downs, businessmen detailing repeated detentions, students missing flights after random checks. One viral post read, "I'm not a senator, I'm just a teacher. But what happened to Carter happens to me every time I fly. The only difference is, no one films it." Activists amplified these stories, weaving them into the larger narrative that Carter's ordeal had made undeniable. Even celebrities joined in. Actors, musicians, athletes, all lending their platforms to the cause. A Grammy-winning singer tweeted, "Respect shouldn't require a badge. We stand with Senator Carter." Overnight, what began as one man's humiliation had become a movement as cultural as it was political. Inside Carter's townhouse in Washington, the weight of the storm pressed in from every angle. His phone vibrated endlessly. Calls from journalists, texts from colleagues, requests from advocacy groups. His staff scrambled to manage schedules, arranging interviews while screening threats. Elena watched her husband pacing the living room, his brow furrowed. "David, you can't answer every call," she murmured. He paused, exhaling slowly. I don't need to answer every call. I just need to answer the right ones. That afternoon, he stepped before reporters again, but this time not outside his home. Instead, on the steps of the Capitol. Cameras clicked in rapid-fire bursts, microphones thrust forward. "Senator Carter," shouted one journalist. "What message do you have for Americans watching this unfold?" He looked directly into the lenses. This movement is not about David Carter. It is about the countless nameless faces who endure in dignity at the gates of their own country. If we value safety, we must also value fairness. If we honor democracy, we must defend dignity. This is bigger than any one man. It is about who we are as a nation. His words cut through the chaos like steel through cloth. That evening, news anchors replayed the clip with reverence. A commentator observed, "Rarely do we see a scandal transform into a moral moment. Carter has turned personal humiliation into a national mirror." Communities responded in kind. Churches held prayer vigils, universities organized forums, and civic groups scheduled marches. In a matter of days, the storm had crystallized into a movement. David Carter was no longer just a senator who had been profiled. He was the unwilling spark for a fire-demanding justice at every airport gate in America. Behind the polished marble facade of Washington, power often moved in silence. Conversations behind mahogany doors, deals struck in hushed tones far from the cameras. In the days following the media storm, Senator David Carter found himself invited into these inner sanctums more frequently than he cared for. His office became a revolving door of colleagues, some offering encouragement, others warnings disguised as advice. One evening, long after the Capitol lights dimmed, Carter sat across from Senator Whitmore, a senior lawmaker known for his influence on the Homeland Security Committee. The older man leaned back, folding his hands with deliberate patience. "David," he began, his voice heavy. "This movement you've sparked, it's powerful, but it's dangerous. Agencies don't like being embarrassed. The administration doesn't like being cornered. You keep pressing, and you'll make enemies that don't forgive." Carter met his gaze without flinching. "With respect, Senator, those enemies already exist. I didn't create them by being humiliated at an airport. They created themselves by allowing bias to become routine." Whitmore sighed, shaking his head. "Idealism is admirable, but Washington eats idealists alive. Pick your battles, David. Don't turn this into a war." Carter leaned forward, his tone even sharper. "When a citizen is treated like a suspect for the color of his skin, that's not a battle, it's already a war. I won't stand by while dignity is rationed at the gate." The silence stretched between them, thick as concrete. Whitmore finally pushed back his chair, muttering, "Then God help you, son. You're about to find out how deep this goes." The depth revealed itself days later in a meeting at the Justice Department. Carter and his closest allies, including Senator Ramirez and Representative Elaine Cho, sat across from senior officials who looked more like cornered bureaucrats than guardians of justice. A deputy attorney general adjusted his tie nervously, sliding a folder across the table. "We've received intelligence that the incident at Atlanta wasn't isolated. There are internal reports of profiling complaints going back 5 years. Most were buried." Ramirez leaned forward, incredulous. "Buried? By whom?" The official hesitated. "Middle management. Sometimes higher. These cases never saw the light of day because they were categorized as operational errors or miscommunication." Carter's jaw tightened. "So you're telling me the government knew and chose silence?" The man raised his palms. "We're telling you we have evidence. But if you go public without coordination, you risk compromising ongoing operations." Carter's laugh was bitter. "Operations? Call it what it is. Complicity." Cho cut in sharply. "Senator Carter isn't asking for permission. He's demanding accountability." The official's face hardened. "Accountability comes with consequences. Push this too far, and you'll expose methods, jeopardize funding, destabilize security at the busiest airports in the nation. Carter's voice rose, slicing through the bureaucratic fog. If security depends on injustice, it isn't security. It's tyranny with a badge. The room went silent. Papers rustled, pens tapped, but no one dared meet his eyes. For Carter, the meeting confirmed what he already suspected. Reform would not come from polite requests or whispered compromises. It would come only by dragging hidden truths into the light. That night, in the solitude of his townhouse, Carter sat surrounded by boxes of evidence, reports leaked from whistleblowers, affidavits from travelers, statistics collected by watchdog groups. Elena entered quietly, setting down a tray of untouched food. "David, you can't keep carrying this weight alone," she whispered. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "If not me, then who? They think this storm will pass, that the headlines will fade, but behind those headlines are lives, missed funerals, lost jobs, children scarred by humiliation. I can't let this disappear." Elena knelt beside him, her hand closing around his. "Then don't fight alone. Build a coalition. Make them see this isn't just your crusade." Her words lingered long after she left the room. Carter stared at the papers scattered across his desk. An ocean of stories too heavy for one man. He realized then that Whitmore was right about one thing. This was deeper than he imagined. But he also understood something Whitmore never could. Movements don't collapse under pressure. They ignite when leaders refuse to bow. By midnight, Carter had drafted a new plan, one that would expand the fight beyond hearings and headlines. If the system resisted reform behind closed doors, then he would open every door until the nation itself demanded change. The storm that had begun with a single confrontation at an airport checkpoint reached its breaking point on a humid Thursday morning in Washington. By then, weeks had passed since Senator David Carter revealed his badge in Atlanta, weeks of protests, hearings, and whispered threats in back rooms. The movement had swelled, spilling into churches, campuses, and street corners, but the machinery of government moved sluggishly, as though reluctant to confront its own reflection. That morning, however, Carter decided the time for waiting had ended. He stood at the center of Freedom Plaza, where a sea of citizens had gathered. Families, students, veterans, clergy, many carrying signs that echoed his words. Dignity shouldn't need a badge. Justice at the gate. Safety without bias. Cameras broadcast the rally nationwide. The senator mounted the podium, sweat beading his brow under the summer sun, but his voice carried with unwavering power. "They told us to wait. They told us reforms take time. But tell me, how much time does a father have when he misses his daughter's wedding because of unjust detention? How much time does a student have when she loses a scholarship because she missed her flight? How much time do we have when dignity is stolen one checkpoint at a time?" The crowd roared, fists raised. Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice delayed is justice denied. The chant rippled outward like a wave, echoing against the marble facades of government buildings that loomed around them. For Carter, it was more than a rally. It was a declaration of escalation. Within hours, the demonstration spilled into the chambers of Congress. Activists marched from the plaza to the Capitol steps, their chants reverberating through the marble halls. Lawmakers who had once avoided Carter now scrambled to be photographed at his side. Senator Ramirez clapped him on the back. "You've made this unavoidable, brother. They can't ignore you now." But not everyone welcomed the momentum. In a tense committee meeting, a senior senator slammed his fist on the table. "Carter, you're turning airports into battlegrounds. This chaos endangers national security." David leaned forward, his voice calm but lethal. "Chaos is what happens when injustice festers. Order built on discrimination isn't security. It's oppression with better lighting." The room went silent, but the point was clear. Carter would no longer accept platitudes in place of change. That afternoon, he introduced the Passenger Dignity and Accountability Act, legislation that demanded independent oversight of TSA, mandatory anti-bias training, and a federal review of 5 years of screening data. As reporters swarmed the Capitol steps, Carter stood before their microphones. "This is not symbolic. This is structural. We are done documenting injustice. We are dismantling it." The bill's text spread online within minutes, activists highlighting sections with hashtags. Accountability now. Justice at the gate. Carter Bill. Overnight, what had been a scandal transformed into a legislative movement. But the true turning point came that weekend, when a video surfaced that no one expected. A whistleblower, an officer stationed at Atlanta International, leaked body cam footage showing explicit instructions from a supervisor. Flag any young black males traveling alone for secondary screening. We need to be proactive. The recording went viral instantly, confirming what Carter and countless others had argued all along. On Sunday morning talk shows, anchors looked visibly shaken as they played the clip. One asked bluntly, "How can any traveler trust security now?" Protesters doubled in number, airports across the country facing peaceful sit-ins that brought terminals to a standstill. On Monday, Carter stood once more before cameras, holding the leaked transcript high. This is the proof. Not anecdotes, not speculation. Systemic bias was policy, and we will root it out, no matter how deep it runs. The crowd erupted in cheers, the moment crystallizing into history. Analysts called it the Carter turning point, the instant when a movement shifted from outrage to irreversible momentum. For David, the path ahead remained perilous. He knew powerful interests would resist until the very end. But for the first time, he felt the tide fully turning, as if justice itself had decided it would no longer be delayed.